Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is esteemed author Craig Childs. Thank you for coming back.
Sure, glad to be here.
Well, you're an award-winning author, and you write for New York Times, LA Times, Outside Magazine. You've gotten lots of awards. Your most recent book is called Apocalyptic Planet, and you changed the subtitle. What's the subtitle now?
Now it's Field Guide to the Future of the Earth.
Well, it is indeed.
It used to be Field Guide to the Ever-Ending
Earth.
Ever-Ending Earth, yeah.
Well, this is a topic of such fascination because tell us what your premise was in this book.
Well, I'm looking at the concept of apocalypse and kind of deconstructing it from a scientific perspective and from going out into the world and looking for places that represent different apocalypses. And I guess I wanted to say that this notion of apocalypse is false, that suddenly something happens and everything's over, that apocalypse is a process that is always going on, that there are magnificent endings that are happening to the earth constantly and different forces involved, and I wanted to break it down and say this is how it works.
Do we have an easy definition of apocalypse, the end of the world?
Well, the original Greek definition is apocalypse is an uncovering or revealing of something secret.
Wow.
Held within. And so I'm taking that definition to heart in this book and saying that apocalypse is the removing of all the layers so that you can see what's actually going on. You know, you're stripping away your safety, you're stripping away water in drought, you're stripping away other life forms in extinctions, and you're seeing how this actually works. So I guess I'm using apocalypse as a way of defining the processes of the planet around us.
Wow, I like that better than the end of the world, although there are people, and you call them apocalyptophiles, who love the idea about the end of the world. So there's some people that are terrified, and there are people who just want to be out there with their provisions, and they're going to be survivors, and but they don't look at it as uncovering a new reality because they're so hanging on to the old.
Yeah, and if we had an apocalypse, it would uncover a reality that I don't think they're expecting. I think there's a romance around apocalypse that I'm trying to get rid of in this book, to say, actually, you don't want this to happen. Even if you're excited about it, even if your life is boring and you can't wait for the end, you're going to wish that it hadn't happened.
Yeah. So in this book, you go to various environments currently on the planet, extreme environments, and you talk about them, places where it never rains, places where there's so much water, places like Iowa, the GMO cornfields, where not another life form exists.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
No insects, no birds, no nothing.
You know, very little lives out there. And I counted things up. I went backpacking through a GMO field in Iowa. And you know, maybe it's not radically different from a non-GMO field. There's just a lot more of it. But any kind of industrial crop, no other thing is really allowed to live there, and which, you know, makes sense in a certain way when you have an industrial situation going on like that. But when you step back and look at 90% of Iowa is under agricultural production, I mean, try to imagine that from a New Mexican perspective.
Oh, right.
90% of New Mexico being not arroyos and hills and mountains and plains, but shaved down and growing stuff, which, you know, it's good if you want to support just an immense population. But, you know, there are a lot of questions that come up then. Is this worth it? What are you losing to have this happen?
Well, and you talk about that there's one lady who is fighting to preserve virgin prairie, one little piece of prairie the way it always was.
Yeah, half acre.
Oh, bless her heart.
Yeah, and she's in her 80s, and it's been virgin prairie since the beginning.
Yeah.
Everything around it was consumed by the mid-1800s, so it's been untouched since then. And she just, I remember her saying that she worries about who's going to be next, because she's the last one right now taking care of this place. And I talked to conservation biologists and geneticists about this, and they would say, well, that half acre really doesn't matter in the long run. But then when you look at it on the ground, you go, well, actually, it matters a lot, because this is a human need to keep things from being destroyed, and this is some place where people can put that energy.
One of the things you write about so beautifully is what are we losing when we lose those last little pieces of the prairie, and when we you talk about man's need for wilderness and how nourishing it is, and how divorced our culture is from the wild.
Yeah, it's divorcing ourselves from things that aren't human, the things that we didn't make, things that were here before us. I think that leads us into a world that, maybe we can survive and maybe we can't. I don't know, but to me, it's not a world that makes sense, because it's a world where everything adapts to us rather than us adapting to it, which leaves us in a really vulnerable place, because if there's something large enough that we have to adapt to it,
and there is.
Yes, which that's what we're looking at right now. And if we don't adapt to it, if we've lost that ability, if we think that we are the be-all, end-all of the world, and we have that entitlement, I think we really misunderstand something fundamental about how the world works and our place in it, which I think diminishes our lives in the long run. So I think we end up with a lot more people and a lot less quality and a lot less understanding of what's going on here.
A lot more people and a lot less humanity.
Yeah.
Because you talk about humanity's once intimate connection to wilderness, and what as a species have we lost?
Yeah, we've lost, I think, so much, the ability to understand what's going on around us. It's not us.
And there's a certain amount of respect and reverence to forces outside ourselves, And sometimes, as it is a changing world and there are dramatic weather events, at some point you have to say, and the forest fires that are raging in the West, this is bigger than us.
Yeah, there are things bigger than us, even if we are provoking them. Those bigger things, they're still bigger than us. I mean, we talk about, I think one of the dilemmas in climate change is we're talking about we're not big enough to change nature. Nature's much bigger than us, but it's not true. We're part of this thing, and what we add into it gets collated and dealt with by nature, and it comes out as 100 years of drought, or it comes out as sea level rise. That we're right in there pushing. We're one of the major forces. In fact, we may be the major force, at least in this time in Earth's history. And we're changing this much bigger thing, but it's not like we're separate from the natural world. We are we're one of the things in the world that the world has made. We were created.
And a lot of biologists and scientists talk about the sixth extinction event that's happening now. We are losing species. I mean, they're not even counting the insects,
Yeah.
We are losing species, 50% of the species that once lived? I don't know the exact numbers, but it's enough.
It's a hard number to find, but because we don't know what we're losing.
Yeah.
But we know we're losing it. We know that we can see animals and plants disappearing. So we know that something significant is happening in Earth's history right now, that all the indicators of a significant extinction are popping up. So we're in it.
One other thing you mentioned is that apocalypse is usually not that one cataclysmic event. It's a process.
Yeah.
And do the life forms, like the whales that lived 200 years that you wrote about, do they sense that their world is changing? And do we, as a civilization, do we know how much our world is changing, where in the process we are?
Well, I've wondered that about whales in particular, because they have such long lifespans.
Yeah.
And that they
Longer
see
than
the
ours,
distance.
double ours.
Yeah, they see sea levels rising, channels opening up, places they couldn't go before. And I just wonder, what if we could live 200 years, I imagine our sense of what's important would be different.
Yeah.
Because right now we can go, well, if I can get away with 70 to 100 years without anything catastrophic happening, then I'm good. And we don't really think about, it is your children who are going to be living in this world.
Yeah.
It is their children. We don't want our children to suffer, I'm pretty sure.
And we don't want them to look back at us and say, why didn't you do anything?
Yeah, well, I think they'll know.
I think they'll know.
I imagine they won't blame us. I think they'll just go, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, right now, let's deal. Let's move to what you're working on now, because it has, again, to do with, I don't know anyone who works on the scale of time and worlds and the planet that you do. So now you're working with Ice Age.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what you're working on now.
I'm in the thick of this book. I'm almost finished. But I started by crossing a large ice field, one of the largest remaining ice masses in North America, up in Alaska, looking at what kind of landscape the first people to enter the continent were seeing. What experiences did they have? Why did they come here? Why did they spread? And so I'm following the first colonization of North America, which is, the book starts at around 20,000 years ago. But you really start picking up speed around 15,000 years ago. So that's when, by 13,000 years ago, this continent was occupied from sea to sea. There were people everywhere. There were routes of exchange and picking up resources and dropping them in other places. So I'm following that colonization.
Well, we in New Mexico are very proud to have two benchmark sites for American archaeology. We've got Clovis site, and Clovis Man, Clovis Point's 13,000 years ago, and Folsom.
Yeah.
Folsom sites, Folsom Man, 10,000 years ago. And there is a huge controversy in the deeps of archaeology and paleontology about Siberia, the route that you're talking about now across the Bering Strait, or Iberia, the Spanish peninsula, coming up through Greenland, because all that was frozen to Iceland and over.
Landing over.
It is a little murky.
It is murky. But it's something. Something happened. I'm pretty sure people arrived from Spain and France in the Paleolithic. Whether there were enough people to stick around, I doubt it. There were enough people to leave tools that you can identify. But I think the conduit of people coming into this continent was coming off the Pacific Rim and out of Siberia. So that's where that group of people swamped the gene pool ultimately. So that is the Native American source. The people who are here now, their genes go directly back to the Pacific Rim and to Siberia. Whereas European arrival, it happened, but it was more like a Gilligan's Island happened. Where they landed, they dropped a bunch of stuff, but they probably weren't populous enough to genetically survive. That's my take on it, at least.
Well, we'll see more when the book comes out. We're speaking today with Craig Childs, a wonderful author. Do you have a title for your new book?
It is called When We Were Giants.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. And do you describe, to think of these people, it's a very hard life in Siberia. Alaska, except for the little bit of summertime, is also a very hard life.
Yeah.
They come down to rainforests. They come down to the Great Plains. They come down to, wow. Yeah,
they covered the continent. I'm writing about Alaska and the coast, the northwest coast, and then the next place I go is Florida, which is the site of the oldest really robust human settlements in North America. It's the Florida Panhandle, which doesn't mean that they were the first. It just means
they were really
they're the ones
for
we
them.
Can find.
Yeah,
they were here. There's some evidence. It's controversial evidence, but that people may have been in New Mexico 30,000 years ago.
Well, guess who else was in New Mexico in the ancient past? Because you have been looking at the mammoth tracks. Talk to me about your adventures in New Mexico.
Yeah, there are old lake beds in southern New Mexico that mammoths and other Ice Age megafauna walked through and left tracks. And paleontologists working at White Sands on the Missile Range have been looking at tracks out there and finding these are ephemeral. They appear, they're under the surface blows away or is washed away, and these actual trackways become visible where you can see mammoths walking. And they don't last long because they're just made out of sediment. So once they're exposed, they might last some years before they're just blown away, and they're very fragile. But they represent 20,000-year-old mammoths walking around on lake edges.
Is there any more tangible evidence, like skeletons?
Oh yeah,
tusks?
Plenty.
Ah.
I mean, all over New Mexico, all over the country, these skeletons keep popping up. I mean, in New York City, excavations, construction coming up with mammoth skeletons. It's the most recent age to ours, so everything is still in the ground. And there have been dire wolves and saber cats and all manner of megafauna found in New Mexico.
And so this is, of course, contemporaneous with early man.
Yeah.
And we were competing with those megafauna. We were competing with the short-nosed bears and the dire wolves and the saber-toothed cats.
Yeah, we were right in the thick of it. And actually the Blackwater Draw site at Clovis, in Clovis, New Mexico, outside of Clovis, was one of the first solid pieces of evidence that humans and megafauna lived together at the same time.
That's right. It was a game changer because they found, was it a mammoth skeleton with the point, with the spear point?
I believe so, yeah.
In the vertebra.
Yeah, and that's actually, since then, a number of those have been found in Florida, Oregon, Washington. So we're starting to see more and more of this, that it was easier to see in New Mexico. That's why New Mexico became an early site. But now archaeologists are seeing it all over the place.
Well, what I love about your work is, again, the breadth of scope, because we're going from early man, first man here, right up to what the future will bring. Since you're a man of the West, because you talk about your life and times and way as tree rings and kind of target geography, that you always end up in the West, that this is where your home is. Can you take a minute to talk with us about some pretty important issues in the West, one of which is the seeming war on predators, that wolves and cougars, bears and coyote are seen as the enemy. There's no sense of the balance and the web of life.
Yeah, that balance is so hard for us to strike, because I think our relationship with predators has long been, destroy every predator in your path. I look at the Ice Age and think that was your goal at the time.
Yeah. Get them before they get you.
Yeah. And when I've traveled up in native villages in the Arctic, they have that attitude. It's kill everything within a certain radius around your village so that you have a defensible zone. Mm-hmm. But we don't live in that world anymore. I mean, in an Arctic village, you live in that world. You have polar bears right there, and you've got to keep a buffer. But we don't live in that. We have devoured almost everything. Most predators have been killed. And I mean, there's still many out there. We have mountain lions, we have black bears, we have coyotes. They're part of this world, and we have to just take them out of the picture or drive them to the edge of extinction. It has the potential of throwing so much off balance that we don't fully understand wildlife balances and how things work out here. And just to clear the board on it, just to say you can take as many as you want.
Well, we just in New Mexico increased the limits for cougars and for bears.
Yeah.
And yet these creatures are fighting climate change, drought, habitat encroachment. And every week you read in the paper, someone has gotten between the mama bear and the cub. And so the bear, of course, attacks, and then they go out and kill this marauding bear. Whereas we're up there in the berry patch where she was happily. I mean, you know, we've invaded on what little space those bears have left.
Well, we're losing our understanding of how to be around animals, and as our communities expand, we're expanding into their ranges. So there are going to be these conflict areas. But to take that out of the equation, I think we'd end up with a much larger problem in the end. There's a system working here that's not a human system.
Yeah.
And we're going at it as if humans were the only thing that mattered. And eventually that's going to come back and bite us. You know, it's going to be a problem. And losing species and tipping balances out of control in the wildlife world, that's not going to lead to good things. That's not going to lead to biodiversity, to resiliency. That's going to lead to us just paving everything and taking over the world, which is what we're on our way to do.
And one of the things you point out in Apocalyptic Planet is that we need that biodiversity. Whenever there's an extreme situation, it might be some little species. Well, look at the meteors and the death of the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
We were some little species that didn't have much chance again. But then when the big change came, the dinosaurs were gone, other species like Homo sapiens or whatever the early name of it was, were able to rise.
Yeah.
And then there's the eternal cockroaches and rats that seem to survive everything. But one of the functions that your books have for me is to walk me back into that world, the world of wildness and the world of wilderness, and to remember how it was when I was a child. But someone wrote that book, The Last Kid in the Woods, The Last Child in the Woods, because kids are not getting out in the world. You were raising two sons, and you were giving them the richness of wilderness. But what about city kids, and how do we, this is what I want to know. How, for people, how do you reconnect them to wilderness, reconnect them to the honor and recognition of other species that we share the planet with?
I think you just show them. They see it and they know. I mean, I used to work taking kids from LA out into the desert. And you know, the second they get out there, they know what's going on. They have a sense of it. It's just, maybe it's something they've never seen before, but as soon as they're in it, they adapt and they understand what kind of world they're in. So for kids especially, it's easy.
Yeah, well, kids are open anyway.
Yeah, just
but what about the people who make the laws and who make the rules, who forgot?
It's easy to forget.
Yeah.
I can understand why you'd forget. You could live in a city and barely know that there's something going on outside of you, and you know that it's just a place for vacations, it's just a getaway, and not realize that this is actually the planet itself. This is what has been going on here for millions, if not billions of years. This is what will be going on for the rest of the planet's history, and we're here for this moment. And yeah, we're making a big impact, and we're planting our flag and shouting out loud, but it's a bigger world than us, and I think it's as if we're trying to create a very lonely place where it's only us.
We have a minute left, but would you give our audience some advice for us to really open up our eyes more and to open up our hearts more to the greater world around us?
Yeah, I think just opening the door.
Yeah.
I think just stepping outside. I mean, even if it's in the city, it doesn't matter where it is. If you open the door and just pay attention, just walk outside and realize that, oh, the sky, the clouds, the breeze, the sun, the stars, the moon, these things are happening. Just a recognition of it. And I think most people know that feeling of going out and just being filled with what's out there, even just a glimpse.
And in New Mexico, we have so many extraordinary places. Well, the whole West says. So in half an hour in your car, you could be somewhere so nourishing, a lake, a river, mountains, the wind and the aspens. The aspens will be changing soon, to go and partake of just being in the world, the greater
it's right
world.
there. It's right next to us.
and if you can't go, I want you to read these books. Animal Dialogues. This is one of my favorite books. You talk about animals you've encountered, but your chapter about ravens, about mountain lions, about sheep. This is almost as good as being out there. Another book that we didn't get to this time, Finders Keepers. Who owns the past? What a provocative question. And we did talk about Apocalyptic Planet and fasten our seatbelts. It's going to be maybe a 6,000-year ride, but it's going to be a ride. Thank you. Our guest today is author Craig Childs. Thank you for sharing with us today. And I'm Lorene Mills. I want to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.